I could ask people to help, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes when you really feel like there's no control and you don't have any control, it's God, and He can move mountains to make the thing that you want possible. And if it's not that, it's something better.
How's everybody doing today? Welcome to Afikra Stage 2. We have some really wonderful guests today that are going to be talking, and you're going to be learning some really nice information. I go by DJ Amanra. I'm going to be your host today, playing some tunes for you guys. But first up, I would love to welcome Asma to the stage. Let's give a big round of applause for our very first moderator, Asma, please, everybody. If we could also have Lulwa Ayub please come to the stage as well. Give it up for Lulwa Ayub, everybody.
Hello everyone. Welcome to this live edition of Afikra podcast at Quoz Arts Festival. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Lulwa Ayub, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Asma Elbadawi. She is a Sudanese British poet, photographer, basketball player, and activist. She started her poetry career at the BBC radio, and where she joined and won a competition. And she is also known for having petitioned and successfully lifted the hijab ban on women's basketball. So, welcome, Asma. Very lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Asma, I had a lot of fun preparing for your interview because there's just so much. So let's just start there. Poet, basketball player, photographer, activist. Tell us, how did these things come into your life, and how did they shape who you are today?
When I get asked this question, it's really strange because for me, they all kind of always existed. When I think about my poetry, for example, I feel like my poetry is always me trying to say something about society, about the world, about how I'm feeling, or different experiences. When it comes to like sports and basketball and sort of the activism around that, it was all also the same. It was like making a change in the world, making sure that like young girls who want to play sports are seen and see other girls who are doing similar things to them, so that they can also dream big, you know? So that was kind of also part of that. And with the photography, I feel like photography was the one that was the most random, because I went to study fashion at university, and then we did a course around photography, and then my tutor said that I should pursue this as like a degree and everything. And I was like, no. I told my parents, we've decided that I'm going to do this foundation year, and then after I'm going to do the fashion thing. And they convinced me, took 3 months for them to convince me. And after that, I was just like, wow, like I was blown away by your ability to tell stories through pictures, through like poetry, like combining all these different things together. And I've never stopped doing it since.
So you talk about, it's always been there, and, you wanted to tell stories. Do you feel like which came first, essentially? Was it that you fell in love with the art form and you kind of found your voice through that, or you always had something to say and you found a medium that you enjoyed?
So I'm dyslexic, so when I was at school, I found it really difficult to like articulate myself like in very formal writing. It was really like, it was too much for me. There was like dots that I needed to put. There was like grammar things. Like I kept getting my books returned to me with like loads of red markings. But then when we did poetry, I think I was 8, so I was introduced to poetry then, and it almost felt like there was no rules. Like you could just end the sentence wherever you wanted, you could make things rhyme, you could like play. And then I just kept doing that, and actually didn't show it to anyone for so many years, because I was like, if I show them this, they're gonna ruin it for me. So I kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it. But also I grew up in the UK. My parents both came from Sudan. We were really, really young when they came to the UK. And I would always watch my parents like call their brothers and sisters and their like mom, and there was almost like a sadness in the house. And so I always knew that like I'm from somewhere else, you know? And I never knew what that somewhere else looked like until I went there. And over the years, it was almost like I had to tell these stories, you know, where I'm from, where do I belong, and it just kept getting more and more intense, like that need to do that.
Right. So you talk about, you're from Sudan and you grew up in there. What has been your relationship like with Sudan throughout your life, and how does it reflect in your art?
The first time I went to Sudan, I was 10, and I didn't know what to expect, you know. After that, we went almost every year, every 2 to 3 years. We were constantly there. By the time I sort of was at university, I went every year, and I would go sort of go in the beginning of the summer holiday with my mom, and then my mom would come back, and then my brother would go, and like whoever went, and then at the end I would come back with someone else. So I would spend like 9 weeks there, and those weeks were not like in one place. It was like I would go to like Medeni, for example, where my uncle was living, and I would spend a week there, and then I would ask to go somewhere else, and then they would take me somewhere else where another uncle was, and I would just sort of like float around Sudan, and always with my camera. And initially, like I would just take pictures, and I lost all the pictures that I took during those years. But it was this thing of like just needing to go and see and sit, and sometimes I did nothing. Like sometimes I would just sit in the house for like a week and just read books, like books and books and books. And some days I would just eat with them and do stuff with them, you know. That was just very normal. And since then I've always liked to travel in that way as well, you know, like as if I'm going home rather than visiting a place.
Right. And this transition from like, Sudan was kind of something that you heard about, you visited, sparsely until, you started going a lot and going frequently. Did that kind of change how you portray Sudan in your poetry or your photography? Is there an evolution there, or does that change?
Definitely. I think at the beginning it was my mom and dad's Sudan. It was their thing, you know? And then after I kept going back, it became like I had my favorite coffee shop, you know? I had the place that I went where I would meet girls and we play basketball. There was like all these little spots that I kind of, within time, started to know, and people started getting to know me as well. So I started connecting with the poetry community there. There was like something called Nas with Notepads. I used to go every month and perform, and there was like Arabic and English poetry that would like happen there. And then also there was like the photography community. They would all get together. They would like take photos with each other, like do random shoots, and they'd collaborate. And I sort of got into that as well. So then the stories became less about this is where I'm from, and more like this is who I am.
Wow, that's fascinating. I have a question on, you mentioned both poetry and photography. Do you feel like you use them interchangeably to express things, or is there something that you can express through photography that you're not able to in poetry, and vice versa?
I tend to explore things for a period of time. So I might explore it initially with poetry, and then with photography, and then I might go back to the poetry, and then I might make a video that combines both. And then once I feel like, okay, I'm done, my therapy is done, I'll just move on to like the next kind of topic. But sometimes I can't do it while I'm feeling the emotions. I have to give it time, and then I can create the stories that I want to say, basically.
What topics have you explored?
At one point, I explored being a mom. Recently, that's been my thing, like exploring being a mom. I explored masculinity at one point because I kept feeling like we were being taught like this is what a man is like and this is what he should be like, and then I was just meeting loads of toxic men, and I was just like, why are they all like this? But then I wanted to see the other side of it rather than the, oh, you're all horrible, bad men kind of thing. But that was really interesting for me because I was obviously I'm a woman. So there was a lot of men who were like, actually, that's not what it's like. But then I also got men who would be like, oh my God, this is how exactly I was feeling, but I didn't have the words. So there's like a combination of things. And then there's other stuff where probably the one that I explored the most was probably eating disorders. That one I ended up creating loads of stuff around that, and then that was probably the most therapeutic as well, because I didn't know that I needed to do that, and then I did that.
You do, you talked about dyslexia, you talked about eating disorders. There's such a vulnerability to your art. How important is that for you? And, you said it was therapy, but can you tell us more?
I mean, I feel like if I'm not showing the flaws or telling the problems and the pains that I'm going through, then I'm not really saying much. This is gonna sound really bad, but I'm gonna say it anyway, because we talked earlier and I was saying my humor is really bad, but I've been around people who, like, I go to a poetry set and there's someone talking about tea for like 10 minutes, and I'm like, okay.
Art has to add something. It has to add some value.
Like, okay, you like your tea, but tell me who made the tea. Was it your grandma? Was it your, like, who was it? I like to know those kind of things. Like, how did you get there? Like, was there pain involved? How did you overcome it?
Right.
Are you ever going to overcome it? Some things you're never going to overcome, and that's fine. But can you be, like, brave enough to tell those stories? And for me, I feel like I always had two outlets, and I needed those two outlets. And basketball, for me, is that place I can go be strong. And I can punch and hit and shove and do whatever I want. But I need somewhere else where I can cry,
Right.
And some of my poems I write, and I'm crying. Like, I write them, and there's tears, and there's, like, emotions and everything. And then I do them on stage, and the first time, I might cry. The second time, after that, it's like I'm sharing something with people who will hear it for the first time. But for me, I found a release in actually sharing it with other people. I'm not holding it in.
I think it translates a lot, the fact that you said you write and you cry. When I came into your poetry, I got very emotional within an hour. And I was like, I need to stop this, I need a break. So it really translates and it shows. I want to ask, sometimes in your poetry, in your English poetry, you insert Arabic lines. And I noticed you don't always translate those in your videos. Tell me about these choices.
I have this thing where I'm like, if you understood, you understood. And if you didn't, bad luck, Go find out. And only because, one, I feel like it takes away. Sometimes you're doing a poem and then you're like, I said a verse or I said a line, and then, now I have to tell you what it means. But we go to so many places and people don't translate for us. Like, it's always like, she doesn't know how to speak English properly. Her English is broken. Okay, you don't know how to speak Arabic. I'm not going to translate for you,
The burden is not on us.
Yeah.
Right.
So go learn, go explore.
What about Islam and so I know you talk a lot. You use a lot of Quran in your poetry. You talk about hijab. One of my favorite lines was when you described hijab as one of the most incredible forms of resistance to beauty standards and the male gaze. What does it mean to you to represent Islam in your work, and why is it important?
This is a bit of a hard, not hard question. But for me, I always see the hijab as it's my relationship with Allah. It's no one else's business, And after I've sort of told everyone I'm a Muslim, I don't have to create Muslim content. And I don't have to tell everyone I'm Muslim. I can write about motherhood, I can write about whatever. I'm representing Islam in the sense of I'm a Muslim woman. And I embody all these different things. My identity has all these different things, and they're all part of it. But the Quran specifically, I have a really strong connection with the Quran. And that's mainly because my mom never listened to music when we were growing up. And she never let us listen to music in the house. So whenever we traveled anywhere, she would put the Quran on. Like, if we were in the house, she'd put the Quran on. When we were walking to school, she would hold my hand and my brother's hand, and she'd recite Quran, and she'd tell us, like, recite after me. And when you do this for so many years, you start, like, building dots and connecting things, like from normal life. Like, something will happen and you'll think, this reminds me of this ayah in the Quran. And so when I'm writing my poetry, I feel like sometimes I don't have the language to express that this is what I felt like, and this is the ayah that in the Quran that actually talks about this. So I put the ayah in.
That's beautiful. I want to talk more about you mentioned your mom. I want to talk about your parents. I feel like, growing up in a Muslim, conservative, Arab household, I mean, for many of us, there's like this tug and pull of like empowerment and support, but also like, traditional boundaries. And so what was that like growing up? Was it just, go for your arts and go for it, or was there this kind of struggle? And
I was the youngest. I'm still the youngest, but was the youngest growing up. So I felt like I didn't do what my brother did. I didn't have like a set of rules that I felt like I had to follow. I mean, I knew they existed, but I wasn't willing to make those sacrifices, like become a doctor. I was like, why am I gonna go do maths and science? I don't like them, and it's already a struggle. And then I'm gonna go and live somewhere far from home, and then I have to study all these things by myself. No, I don't want that. But I had very open and honest conversations with my parents from a very young age, and they also did the same with us. Like for the most random thing, like my mom wanted to buy a house once, and she was like, "So, we want to buy a house," and I was like, "Okay."
how old were you?
I was like 10. I was like, I want the room at the top, like
Right.
that's my room, and I want a bathroom. And it was like, I wasn't gonna pay for the house, but I was allowed to be involved in those conversations. So when it became about things that actually matter, I knew that they would listen. So it took time for certain things, like the photography. My mom she didn't know the Islamic jurisdictions around it at the time. So she was like, oh, I'm not sure about the photography. And then after like I did it anyway, because my dad was like, okay, do it. After 3 years, she called me and she was like, Asma, I have good news for you. And I was like, what? And she was like, I asked the sheikh. He said it's okay.
That's great. That's great.
It's been 3 years.
Thank you for that fatwa, Sheikh. Okay, so I heard you talk once about a dua that you used right out of university, where you asked God to, help you use your gifts or show you how to use your gift. Could you share that with us? And I also want to know, now that you've learned to use them, what has that evolved into today? What does that dua look like today?
The dua was, it was three things. It was like a small, big dua. I'll just call it small, big dua. But I remember after I finished university, after I did my master's, I was at home and I felt like I didn't want a 9 to 5. I tried a 10 to 2. It didn't work out. I stayed for 2 weeks. It was too cold. The building was freezing. And I just remember sending him an email being like, I'm not coming. It's too cold. The building is too cold for me. Please send the money for the last 2 weeks that I did. Bye. Thank you. But the irony of that was she actually emailed me like a year later and she was like, I'm so glad you quit the job. Look what all the amazing things that you've done after you left. But I remember like that wasn't for me. And then I sort of didn't know what to do next. So I sat down and I kept thinking, and then I remember seeing people who freelance, like online, and it'd say like freelancer, and I was like, what is a freelancer? So I remember just saying to Allah, look, you taught me, like you gave me an education in photography and video, but you never showed me how to use it. So please, Allah, show me how to use that. And you gave me a love for photography, for poetry, but you never really showed me how to use that. So like, show me how to use that. And lastly, like you put like a love for me for sports as well, but you never really showed me how to use that either. So can you please show me how to use that? And that was it. And I literally remember I was downstairs and I went upstairs and I found like someone had inboxed me on Facebook saying, what do you do? I'm like, he's a poet. And he was like, oh, okay. If anything comes up, I'll let you know. And then within like a month, I was going, I think at the time I had no money. I remember taking money from the government when you're looking for a job, and it was like £74. I literally used this £74 to go to workshops in London. I would get like the bus, I would get anything. You know how people tell you like, I started from nothing, I just had a dream?
Yeah.
That's how it was for me. And I remember like I would take this 74 pound and I would go all the way to London and I would sit on the bus for 5 hours and then I would go to this workshop for 2 hours only and then I'd come back. And then the same guy messaged me again, like a month later. He was like, hey, there's this competition, you should enter it. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm more confident now. So I did it and I shared that. And I ended up winning for my region. And then everything else happened after, like the campaign. I got invited to be part of the FIBA campaign. So that was like the basketball side of stuff. And then my social media started growing. That was like the photography side of stuff. And then it was just like everything was just coming to play, you know, at the same time in almost harmony. And I just knew like, okay, this is from Allah. And so since then, I've always known that like I could ask people to help and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes when you really feel like there's no control and you don't have any control, it's God. And He can move mountains to make the thing that you want possible. And if it's not that, it's something better.
What do you ask for now? What's next for Asma?
I just want to sleep. A full night's sleep.
A new mother, ladies and gentlemen. Asma, would you perform for us one of your poems?
Okay. This one is, it's a recent one. It's called Dear Daughter. I'm going to do it again later, but I thought I would tease you with it for now. Dear daughter, you were growing inside me at a time where the blood of our people stained the streets and homes of my homeland, where red, green, white, and black came to symbolize resistance, and the female body was used as a weapon. I kept consoling myself by reciting, Innahu huwa yuhyi wa yumeet. Some bodies are commanded to take their first, while other bodies are commanded to take their last breath. Your first breath welcomed me into motherhood. I hope you come to realize the meaning of Sami'a Allahu liman hamida. I asked myself how my mom did it. She unpacked never to repack till a decade later. I wonder how she greeted the grey skies every morning after she was so used to a sun that rarely hid behind clouds. I don't know how she managed to sleep beneath a roof after years of sleeping in a house beneath the moonlight, how cartons of milk filled her fridge after milking fresh milk from cows, and how her tongue grew accustomed to speak a foreign language. The seasons changed as you grew inside me, and with it I grew fearful. I asked myself, how will I teach you not to fear the monsters that come to life in the daylight, the ones that take homes, lands, and use weapons, and use women as weapons? How will I show you our roots if there are no inbound flights? How will you survive in a world that supports genocide? I don't have all the answers, but I will keep holding your hand until my last breath and encourage you to recite, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ.
I warned you it was emotional, huh? It's beautiful, Asma. Thank you very much for sharing. Where can people follow you?
My social media is my name. It's the Asma Elbadawi. And I'll be performing in a few hours anyway on another stage.
Thank you so much, Asma. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Please follow Afikra podcasts on YouTube, Instagram, and Apple Podcasts, and sign up on afikra.com. Thank you.